My name is Jacob. I am 50 years old, have 2 adult children, and am married to Victoria, who is 48. We have lived a comfortable suburban life, nothing extravagant but still stable and secure. Our children, a 22-year-old son and a 20-year-old daughter, have moved out. We've always been close, or at least, that's what I thought. A few months ago, I started noticing small things that didn't quite feel right. Victoria often worked late, came home tired, and maybe a bit distracted. I assumed she was just busy with work, and since we lived fairly independent lives and the kids had moved out, I didn't think much of it. Sometimes, you might even appreciate having a little extra time to yourself. I had no reason to suspect her of anything, and honestly, I believed everything was as it should be. Then I received a mysterious text message. It was from a number I didn't recognize. I know people sometimes get spam and strange messages, but this one explicitly said, "Hi Jacob, we need to talk. It's very important. I know you don't know me, but my name is Ellen. This concerns Victoria and my husband, Mike." At first, I thought it might be a scam or a joke. The wording was so strange, and it gave me an uneasy feeling. I considered ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. I replied simply, "I don't know any Ellen. Who are you? And what do you mean this concerns Victoria and Mike?" She asked to meet me at a cafe. I was skeptical. Why would I meet a stranger claiming to have important information about my wife? But I couldn't stop thinking about it. For one, she had mentioned Victoria's name. She also mentioned a man named Mike. I knew Victoria had colleagues, but I couldn't recall her mentioning anyone named Mike, at least not that she'd told me about. I assumed there had to be some sort of connection, so I sent another message to Ellen, asking when and where she wanted to meet. She suggested a time that worked for me, knowing Victoria would be at work. We arranged to meet at a small, relatively anonymous cafe. I took half an hour off work, saying I had an errand to run. I was nervous and had a strange ache in my stomach as I headed there. I had a strong feeling that, whatever this was, it wasn't good news. I desperately hoped it was a misunderstanding. Maybe it was about finances or something completely unrelated. I tried to calm myself, but my pulse was racing as I walked in. There she was, a beautiful young woman in her mid-20s, looking nervous as well. I approached, and she introduced herself as Ellen. She didn't start with any pleasantries but went straight to the point, as if she couldn't hold back her emotions. She told me that her husband, Mike, and my wife, Victoria, had been having an affair for over a year. I felt the ground shift beneath me. It was a paralyzing moment where I couldn't even speak. I think I just stared at her, because she began apologizing for being so blunt. I tried to say something, but all I managed was, "Are you sure?" A stupid question, really, but she replied that she was absolutely certain. She said she had evidence, pictures, messages, chat logs. She said she knew it was a shock to me, but she felt I had the right to know. She warned me that it would be hard to read and look at. She wasn't wrong. My initial reaction was to question how she had gotten hold of my number. She explained that she had Googled her way to our address and then looked up my phone number in an online directory. She took out her phone and showed me a folder of pictures. I saw a photo of my wife, at a restaurant, in a situation that could not be misinterpreted. It wasn't an innocent work lunch. There were embraces, kisses. The intimate looks between them testified to something much deeper than mere friendship. Ellen also showed me screenshots of messages where my wife wrote things that made me feel sick to read. The way she expressed herself, tenderly, sometimes even sickeningly sweet, about Mike's body, his scent, how she longed to be with him, how she planned their next meeting. I felt myself break out in a sweat, and I realized then and there that it was true. I didn't even need to ask for more evidence. It was enough. Ellen said she was sorry to have to burden me with this but that she planned to confront Mike. She wanted me to know so I could prepare myself if there were major consequences. I asked how long it had been going on. She replied that she had discovered it a few weeks ago, but the chat logs revealed that the two had been having an affair for over a year. A year. I could barely grasp it. An entire year. She told me she had found evidence that they had met during lunch breaks, late evenings when they were supposedly working overtime, and that they had even gone away to a conference together where they shared a hotel room. She had found receipts for it, text messages confirming they had slept in the same bed. After that meeting, I was utterly devastated. I got into my car, closed the door, and broke down in tears. It wasn't a quiet sob, I was bawling. I don't think I've ever cried as hard as I did then. I could barely breathe, it felt like my entire existence was falling apart. I started going through all my memories with Victoria, trying to find signs I might have missed. I thought about birthdays, family dinners, Christmas celebrations, everything that had been beautiful. And the realization crept in that all of it might have been a facade, at least over the past year. It felt like a knife in my stomach. I called my boss and said I needed to take the rest of the day off because I wasn't in a state to work. He immediately heard in my voice that something was very wrong and told me I could absolutely take time off. I drove around aimlessly with no destination. I didn't want to go home. The thought of going home and seeing Victoria, pretending like nothing had happened, made me sick. I knew I needed to make a decision about how to act. But first, I needed to collect myself. I drove to a large parking lot near a grocery store and stayed in the car. I tried to read the texts Ellen had sent me again, but I felt like I was going to throw up. I took a few deep breaths, wiped away my tears, and decided I needed to have a plan. I quickly realized that Victoria would probably meet Mike that same evening. She had recently started having evening meetings every other week, which matched perfectly with Ellen's information about their schedule. I felt the anger boiling inside me. I thought about confronting her directly, getting home before her, or trying to corner her, but I wasn't ready. I felt too weak, too fragile. I needed to consult someone, but I didn't dare call the kids. I didn't want to involve them yet. It felt too early and too painful. I drove instead to a good friend of mine, my oldest buddy, Peter. He was home. I walked in and barely said hello before breaking into tears again. He was shocked, but when I explained what had happened, he understood. I told him I didn't know what to do, but that I couldn't stay with her anymore. He said, "You can always stay here for a while, but you might need a more permanent solution." I was grateful for his offer but still in shock. We talked for hours, and I realized I needed to speak with a lawyer. Continuing this marriage was unthinkable for me. I sent a text to Victoria saying that Peter and I had had a beer that evening and talked. I told her I didn't want to drive home, so I stayed over. It was past 10 when I got an okay from her. Apparently, they had been at it for a while tonight. Nothing more. I wondered when Ellen would bring it up with Mike. Maybe she hadn't yet because they were working late tonight. Peter and I talked almost the whole night. Still, I felt surprisingly awake the next morning. The next day, I contacted a law firm. They told me I could come in for an initial consultation. I briefly explained the situation, and the lawyer was very clear that I had solid grounds for divorce. She gave me some advice on how to prepare, including gathering evidence like texts, emails, photos, and so on. I mentioned that I had already received quite a bit from Ellen. The lawyer said it was good to have in case Victoria contested anything in the divorce. I felt strange because I've always been someone who tries to be fair and reasonable, but here I was, planning to divorce her without Victoria even knowing I knew. I also started looking for a new place to live. I realized I couldn't stay in the house, at least not for now. We own the house together, but I wasn't ready to confront her face to face. I scheduled some viewings for smaller apartments. I planned to move out as soon as I found something. But until I signed a lease, I needed somewhere to sleep. I didn't want to go home. I decided to stay at Peter's. I sent another text to Victoria saying I was staying at Peter's for another night. We'd had a beer again, and I didn't want to drive. Another okay came, this time around 7 in the evening. No Mike, perhaps? The strange thing is, she didn't ask me anything. I mean, I never drink a drop during the week. And now I was texting her, saying that's exactly what I was doing, 2 days in a row, no less. That should have been a massive red flag. But she didn't react to it at all. The next day, I asked for another day off because I had a viewing for an apartment. I found a sublet that would become available almost immediately. It was in a remote area, not nearly as comfortable as our house, but I didn't care. I signed the lease on the spot. That's when I realized I had made up my mind, there was no going back. I walked around the house while Victoria was at work to see what I needed to pack. It was an emotional roller coaster. I found things that reminded me of our life together, but all I felt was emptiness. I also looked for evidence I could show my lawyer if needed. I wasn't sure if I wanted to dig through everything, but at the same time, I wanted to cover my bases. To my surprise, I didn't have to search that hard. In the laundry basket, I found clothes, underwear with stains that definitely weren't mine. I won't go into details, but it was quite obvious what it was. I held those items and tried to understand how she could have been so careless. Maybe it was a subconscious desire to be caught. Maybe she didn't care at all if she got exposed. My stomach turned, and I dropped the clothes immediately. I managed to get Peter to come and help me with the packing. Since I only wanted to take a few things, it went quickly. Clothes, some furniture. However, nothing that Victoria could have had sex on, so just dressers, my desk, some tech gadgets, books, and things like that. We were done in a few hours. I rented a small van, packed everything up, and we drove to my new apartment. After a trip to a furniture store, I also had a bed, sofa, TV stand, and most of the other things I needed to sleep in my new place. I moved straight into my new apartment and decided not to answer any of Victoria's calls until I was ready. I knew she would come home and be shocked. Sure enough, the phone started ringing late in the afternoon. I didn't answer. Messages poured in. Where are you? Why did you take your stuff? Jacob, what the hell are you doing? I read them but didn't reply. I wanted her to feel the anxiety. After a while, another text came. Has something happened? Are you in danger? And I realized she was starting to get really worried. I ignored that too. Maybe Ellen hadn't talked to Mike yet, or she was playing dumb. Finally, late in the evening, I sent her just one picture. It was one of the photos Ellen had given me, of Victoria and Mike, where she was kneeling with him in her mouth. I wrote nothing, just sent the picture. Seconds later, the phone started ringing again. I turned off the sound, lay in bed, and stared at the ceiling while I heard the phone vibrating and saw the screen light up repeatedly. Sometimes, long, upset texts came in, which I just scrolled past. At first, she pleaded, trying to claim it was a misunderstanding, which was pathetic given the photographic evidence. Then she got angry, writing that I had gone behind her back and was acting immature. I read everything but didn't respond. I left the phone at home when I went to work the next day. The next day, I came back to my new apartment after work and saw that I had countless missed calls. A friend called me, saying Victoria had shown up at his place, screaming and crying, and he had been forced to ask her to leave. She had caused a minor scene, and a neighbor had apparently threatened to call the police if she didn't calm down. My friend told her that she had only herself to blame, that I knew everything, and that there was no point in her trying to explain it away. She seemed to have completely lost it. She tried to question him about where I was living now, but he refused to say anything. Eventually, she left, angry and distraught. I was relieved that she didn't know where I lived. She called me multiple times that evening, leaving desperate voicemails begging me to meet her, to talk to her. She said everything wasn't as I thought, that she could explain. I just felt disgusted. I thought about everything she had done in secret for a whole year. How she had lied straight to my face. I didn't want to hear her excuses. The next day, she showed up at my workplace. I got a call from reception saying a woman, my wife, was there and wanted to see me. I told the receptionist to say I wasn't taking any visitors and that she had to leave. It was satisfying. I felt childish for it. But it was really satisfying. I later heard from a colleague who saw her in the hallway that she looked very upset and was speaking loudly, but our security officer eventually had to ask her to leave. As soon as the lawyer was done with the papers, I instructed her to file them and give them to Victoria. I felt strange, like I was in a dream. Our lawyer advised me to inform the kids because sooner or later they would find out. It felt heavy. I called my son and daughter and asked them to come to my new apartment. They were surprised, wondering why I wasn't living with their mom. I said I wanted to talk about everything face to face. They both came over on a Friday evening. I was very nervous. I told them their mom had been unfaithful and that I had left the house. They were shocked. My son was furious, talking about confronting her. My daughter was sad and cried, but they both understood why I couldn't stay. I explained that I wouldn't stop them from having contact with their mom, but I wanted them to know the truth about why I took this step. They showed me a lot of support and said I was doing the right thing. It was comforting to hear, even though it was also painful to see them hurt. Now a text message came from Ellen saying that she had confronted Mike. She texted me and told me that she had actually met him at home first. She explained that she knew everything and that she had spoken to me. Apparently, he had tried to deny things at first, but she had proof, just like I did. She had already contacted the HR department at their workplace and reported their relationship. Victoria was a mid-level manager and Mike a subordinate, or at least in a closely related role, which violated company policy. The company took it very seriously. Ellen said that both Mike and Victoria were at risk of being terminated. She was so furious and hurt that she had no qualms about taking it that far. She said he had been handed the divorce papers immediately. I felt a certain schadenfreude, which might sound mean, but I felt that Victoria deserved it. At the same time, a small part of me felt sadness about everything collapsing at once. Our marriage, her career, Mike's marriage. 4 lives shattered. But it wasn't my fault. I reminded myself of that. They had made these choices themselves. A few days later, Victoria called me again. I answered despite everything, thinking I needed closure. She was hysterical on the phone, yelling at me for ruining her career. I immediately understood that she had been fired or at least suspended. I simply said, "It's your own actions that ruined your career." She tried to argue that I should have spoken to her first, that I didn't need to go so far as to destroy everything for her. I hung up. I couldn't take it anymore. I had done my utmost to just move on. I hadn't gone out of my way to ruin her career. It was Ellen who reported them to HR. But it seemed Victoria didn't know that. She showed up at my friend's house again, demanding to know where I lived. He called the police when she refused to leave the property. The police came and told her to calm down. She stood there yelling that I was a coward and hiding from her. My friend later told me that the whole thing was very embarrassing. Eventually, the police got her to leave. I felt shaken when he told me about it, but also even more convinced that I needed to keep my distance from her. During all this time, she sent messages with mixed tones, some aggressive, others pleading. She tried to say she was depressed, that she needed me. I could only think, why didn't you think about that before you cheated on me for a year? It felt harsh, but I couldn't muster any sympathy at that point. With every text she sent, I remembered all the evidence, the pictures, and the messages. I could no longer see her as the person I once loved. My lawyer informed me that the divorce papers had officially been filed and that Victoria had received a copy. I expected some kind of response from her, maybe a protest, maybe resistance regarding the division of assets. She was so upset that I assumed she would try to make the process difficult for me. Sure enough, my lawyer told me she didn't want a quick and simple divorce. She argued that she needed time to think everything through, which in practice meant delays. She also objected to me receiving certain assets, but she had no strong arguments. My lawyer said it could turn into a prolonged process, but I was prepared for that. I stood firm. I was done with the marriage. Meanwhile, my children supported me more and more. They met with Victoria once and explained that it was a difficult situation for them too, but they clarified that she couldn't expect me to listen to her after something like this. It didn't calm her down, but they felt compelled to explain that they wouldn't take her side in the divorce. I was proud of them both, despite the circumstances. I continued going to work as usual. I was open with my boss about going through a divorce and that I might need an extra day off if new crises arose. He was supportive, for which I'm grateful. I almost thought Victoria would show up again, but luckily she stopped trying to confront me at work after being turned away. My lawyer suggested I could apply for a restraining order if it continued, but I hoped it wouldn't come to that. After a while, things calmed down a bit. Victoria still sent messages now and then, but not as often. I think she realized I was immovable. The divorce process continued, and I avoided contact with her outside of the legal papers that needed to be signed. My children and I made sure to meet in neutral places at times, so I had dinner with them and asked how they were doing. They were doing relatively well but, of course, thought everything was chaotic. We talked about the future, and I said I would love to have them over to my apartment once I had it set up. Finally, Ellen reached out again. This time, she wrote to thank me for all the support, even though we hadn't really done much for each other beyond exchanging information. But she felt that we shared some kind of unique bond in this horrible situation. She suggested meeting for coffee, saying it would be nice to talk to someone who truly understands what one has gone through. I wasn't entirely sure if it was appropriate. At the same time, I felt a certain curiosity. After all, she was the one who opened my eyes to Victoria's infidelity, and despite everything she was going through, she seemed like a sympathetic person. I replied that I'd be happy to have coffee with her. Right now, I'm in the middle of the divorce process. It's a whirlwind of emotions: anger, sorrow, relief, bitterness, hope. I oscillate between grieving the life I've lost and feeling hopeful about the future. I often wonder if I could have prevented this by being more attentive, but I realize the responsibility isn't mine. Victoria and Mike chose to betray me. They did so knowingly, over a long period. They broke my trust. I'm trying to take it one day at a time, focusing on my work, my children, and establishing some kind of routine in my new apartment. It feels strange and lonely at times, but it's still better than living a lie. My children sometimes tell me about their conversations with their mom. They say she's distraught and still trying to convince me to meet with her. They try to stay neutral but also say that she doesn't seem to grasp the magnitude of what she's done. She claims it wasn't meant to go this far, that it was just a little excitement at first. I don't want to hear those excuses. She was unfaithful for over a year. That's not a small mistake. It's a deliberate and repeated action. Maybe she's in some denial phase, but it's not my responsibility to sort it out. Sometimes my children ask how I'm doing. I'm honest and tell them I'm better than before, but I still have moments of deep sorrow and longing. Sorrow for the family we once were. I grew up believing my marriage would last a lifetime. I never imagined in my wildest dreams that Victoria would be unfaithful for so long, and with a man who was also married. It still feels surreal. But I often remind myself of how I felt during those first days after finding out. I cried in the car, I could hardly breathe, I felt so betrayed and humiliated. Now, at least, I can sleep at night without drowning in tears. It's small progress. I've also been thinking about the upcoming coffee with Ellen. We haven't set a fixed date, but we've exchanged a few texts. I don't really know what her expectations are, if she just wants to talk or if she sees something more in it. I don't feel ready for a new relationship, but I could imagine talking to someone who truly understands. I have friends who support me, but none of them have been through this exact situation. Ellen has experienced the same thing, though from the other side. She's also young, only 25, and had been married to Mike for a short time. It must be an incredibly brutal experience for her to realize that her husband cheated on her with a woman over 20 years older. I'm sure she's grappling with many thoughts. I feel a kind of empathy for her that I can't feel for Victoria. A friend of mine asked if I was interested in Ellen on a romantic level. I honestly said I'm not even thinking along those lines right now. I need to heal and find my footing. He understood but hinted that it might be good to at least have someone to talk to. I don't know. Everything is so fresh, and my trust has been shattered. I can't just throw myself into something new. I also don't want to involve the children in a new relationship before the divorce is even finalized. But just for conversation, it might be good. Maybe it could develop into some kind of friendship. A few weeks have passed since I moved out. The legal procedures are ongoing. I realize it will take some time before everything is finalized. Victoria has stopped calling but still sends texts saying she wants to explain everything, that I should be more understanding. I don't reply. My lawyer says I shouldn't have contact with her beyond what's necessary and that all negotiations should go through the lawyers. The children find it painful to see their mom so upset, but they also understand that she has to face the consequences of her actions. I try to keep a cool head. Sometimes it hits me that I was married for over 25 years, and everything fell apart within a matter of days. Sure, the affair lasted a year, but the realization came to me suddenly and brutally. I've talked to a therapist a few times. It's been comforting to process all these emotions. She said I need to allow myself to feel angry, sad, and disappointed and that I shouldn't rush into any attempts at reconciliation. She believes that infidelity of this nature often leaves deep scars and that I need time to create a new chapter in my life. I'm willing to do that. I feel like I don't have a choice. Ellen mentioned in one of her texts that she's also in therapy. She struggles to sleep and constantly has flashbacks of Mike and Victoria together. She feels betrayed in multiple ways, as if her own dreams of starting a family have been shattered. She's planning to sell their shared apartment and move closer to her parents. I feel sorry for her. I know how devastating it is to lose everything you took for granted. At the same time, I have my own demons. The thought of how Victoria and Mike behaved, in our bed when I was away, maybe in hotel rooms, all the lies told to cover it up, it all makes me sick. There have been nights when I could hardly fall asleep because the images Ellen showed me kept replaying in my mind. I wonder how Victoria could come home and hug me after being intimate with another man. Lately, I've been asking myself if she was ever intimate with me right after Mike. It's not a pleasant thought. How she could smile at me and say she loved me while taking every opportunity to be with him is a mystery to me. I don't understand how people can live with that kind of double life. My friend has been a great help. I don't sleep at his place anymore, but we still spend a lot of time together on weekends. We usually cook together, talk about everything that's happened. He says I should give it time, that life doesn't end at 50. But right now, I sometimes feel quite old and tired. I try to motivate myself by thinking that I have a new chance, that I'm actually free now to do whatever I want. But it's not always easy to see it that way. I'm used to being in a stable marriage, and now I'm completely on my own. The children have started visiting my apartment sometimes. We mostly sit and chat, maybe order takeout. It's nice to see them. They are my pride and joy. I don't want my divorce to affect their view of love, but I understand it might leave a mark. I try to talk to them about it, saying that love can be beautiful but that people sometimes fail. And that it's not their fault. I feel like I want to support them, but at the same time, I need their support too. They've handled it all surprisingly well. My son probably wants to break something but holds himself back. As for Victoria, I've heard from the children that she's doing very poorly. She lost her job, her reputation at work is ruined. Mike was fired too, and Ellen is fully moving forward with her divorce. I guess Victoria and Mike can't exactly start a harmonious new life together. It's not something I want to speculate on, but I suspect their relationship didn't survive the pressure. Part of me feels schadenfreude, but another part just feels emptiness. A strange detail is that I don't feel sexual jealousy in the way one might expect. Sure, I find it disgusting that she was with him, but the strongest feeling is the betrayal and the lies. That she took the liberty to do this behind my back for a whole year. It's not so much about her having sex with someone else, but about the lying, the planning, the manipulation of me and the children, and continuing as if we had a normal everyday life. That's what hurts the most. Sorry for the somewhat disorganized post. But this is how things are right now. The divorce process is ongoing and likely won't be resolved quickly. But I still feel free, even if I'm not legally free yet.
If you liked this story, please subscribe and give us a thumbs up. It helps a lot, and you won't miss out on any future stories. Take care and live your best life.